Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has been spending his weekend staring out over the sands.
Tim Longo. Yeah.
That's when you said that, I'll just go ahead and say we're playing Minecraft so that we can discuss this. What that means, the staring out of the sands. When you jumped in and you're like, oh man, we started in a desert, I didn't really expect how much of an impact that would have on how I started off. That is like starting off Minecraft, which already starts off pretty difficult in the first few days, got extra difficult when it's like, oh, you know what you have? Sand.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll get to all of
that. We should talk about the first few moments. Well, I will talk about the very first moments.
Okay.
Because you're a jerk. So we're, a little bit of a teaser. We're not going to open it up to the community yet, but Brett is running a server, so we're both on it, and we'll probably play synchronously sometimes, but it'll probably a lot of times we'll be playing asynchronously. But I got on there just to test it out, and then all of a sudden I'm taking damage from behind, and I'm like, what the fuck's going on? And then I turn around and Brett is punching me, and the first thing we do on this server is he punches me to death. And
I punched you to death, yeah.
Yeah,
and then I left the server immediately so that you couldn't get revenge.
Exactly. Yeah, and I was like, so that's survival? Are we good? And I was like, yeah, it's survival because you just killed me. Yeah. So, yeah. So anyway, we'll talk about it.
Let me talk about the because we have two announcements. One, because we're doing Minecraft, as Tim mentioned, we are going to open that up, not next week, maybe the week after. Because we've got the holidays coming up, things are going to be a little weird, but probably by the time Christmas break, we'll have it open. I can only take so many. I think it's like 9 more, maybe. So go to the Discord and reach out on the Minecraft thread or something. I'm just going to take the people in order of when they post. Please don't take a slot if you're not actually going to have time to play. Be considerate of others. Or you can DM me in Discord. You can go to the Discord and find my username to DM me too. That's actually probably better, so you don't have to share your Xbox handle with everyone if you don't want to. So do that. DM me, and I will take them in order, and I will just let people know when it's closed. So that's item of business number 1. I'll start taking those names immediately, but we won't actually allow people in for at least a couple of weeks. Second, and this is an announcement from the community, Tim has boldly asked the community to suggest the game he might play in the charity event happening at the end of January, Defeating Games for Charity, benefiting the Video Game History Foundation. So that is also a case where you go to the Discord and drop your suggestion on what Tim should be playing for that event, which is a day-long, 24 hours of streaming at the end of January. Go to the Discord and drop that in the event thread, which is just Defeating Games for Charity. It's one of the channels. So
I just had a thought that I'm not going to share now on what is going to happen here.
Okay.
And I'm afraid.
Oh, well, it's going to be a lot of things.
Yeah, that's true. There's reasons why I didn't finish many games.
Yeah.
So yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not streaming for 24 hours. The
event is 24 hours.
I'll be streaming for
it might have even been longer than 24 hours. I can't remember how long it was last year, but
it might have been super fun. Yeah, and there was a lot of participation, and a lot of community members were part of it.
It raised thousands of dollars. So
yeah,
and in fact, last week. The beneficiary, or one of the beneficiaries was an interview. We thank again the Discord Game Club for providing off-week audio for us, which is, we've been having some challenges with time this year in particular. So Bio and Calamity interviewed Phil Salvador.
Yeah, Phil actually came on the event.
He came on the event last year as well. Yeah. And so they interviewed him. It's a great interview. Thanks again to Calamity and Bio for doing that. And of course, for Phil for being their guest. It was a fun listen. And like I said, it's really helpful to have something to run in the feed on those weeks when we can't get it together. We try to, but it's a weekly podcast. It's a grind.
Yeah, things are pretty wacky right now in various ways. So you just have to bear with us.
Yep. All right, let's get on to Minecraft then. I will run down the list of games from 2009 just to set it a little bit in its place and time, and then Tim's going to talk a little bit about the sort of timeline of things happening with this game, which definitely has a strange sort of way it was introduced to the world, and we can talk about that as well. But from 2009, and largely these are drawn from our discussion of Arkham Asylum, were of course Arkham Asylum, Uncharted 2, Borderlands, which is like on its fourth installment with a side game now. That one's been going strong. Demon's Souls, Brutal Legend, League of Legends, Assassin's Creed 2, that little trilogy I quite like, Infamous, Dragon Age Origins, Left 4 Dead 2, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, Bayonetta, Plants vs. Zombies, and Red Faction Guerrilla, just to name some of the titles from that year, and kind of give you a sense of what was going on. It's funny, when we did this for Arkham, we didn't mention Minecraft as coming out in this year, and we should have. So we regret the error. It's sometimes hard to, because I think it's like 2009 is when the early access started, but 2011 is like the 1.0 release or whatever. So it's like,
yeah, and to be honest, what is it? In Minecraft's wiki, they say Minecraft is a 2011 sandbox game, but I don't think that's the right way to talk about this game. So,
well, take it away.
Disagree. So we consider it a 2009 game, and I will explain why later.
You can start right now. I mean, because it's
yes. Okay. Yeah, we can jump right in.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that was not that long ago that we did.
No. Yeah. There's not too much to dive into more deeply on that year. I did want to do a quick shout out to Artemis, even though we never want to quite encourage him as much as he wants us to, but he just did an event Minecraft related, or did it happen already? I think it did. Happened. Yeah, it did. Yeah, and I wanted to give him a little bit of credit for planting this seed in my mind too, for suggesting Minecraft, because he did it with, I know community members and some of his viewers and stuff could jump in with him for that event. So we're doing a similar thing here. So thanks, Artemis, for giving us the idea to play this, because I do think it's an important game to play. And now that we've started, I'm even more excited and convinced that it's a game that we should be playing for the podcast, because it's bringing back all of these weird game development memories. So jumping in, I guess the main topic that I want to make sure we hit for the first episode, and the reason that I just was on my soapbox for it being a 2009 game, and we were talking about this in pre-show, and Brett is right in that it's obviously not the first game to be released in a beta form, unfinished form that you pay for and then get updates along the way. However, it blew up so big when it came out, even in its very basic form. And it did have so many updates over the early years before it got to 1.0. My memory is we didn't have the term early access really defined at the time. And because this was a product that both blew up and was, basically indie, but also became a really huge indie game. And, when I'm looking at the timeline, which I'll rattle through some sort of tidbits in the timeline I'm looking at, which is there's a great Minecraft-timeline github.io. I don't know
Okay.
why it's there, but it's a
So
very
you can do
handy.
pull requests,
Okay, sure,
for your
yeah.
timeline.
It's very weird, but the timeline is very handy to see kind of like what they added where, and it surprised me actually some things that I'd forgotten. But we didn't have the real concept of early access, which is now just so commonplace. The concept of releasing a game before it's quote unquote done or at its 1.0 phase, we just take it for granted now for the most part. But this game was very basic. And then over the course of many years, they got to eventually 1.0, which was 2 years later, basically. Looks like around 2 years later. And, because especially you had to pay for the beta version, and it blew up, it sort of was the beginning of this sort of concept of giving developers the permission to release something unfinished. It still has to be good enough for people to want to play it, right? So a beta version, it doesn't mean it can be broken or whatever. It's just not, it doesn't have maybe the full features that you had hoped it would. But so really from this point on, many developers started doing this more and more. And as we know now, Steam has a whole category for early access, right? It's just a thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, you still choose as a player whether you want to opt in to something. And now we even have digital refunds if you don't like it or whatever. But just in the old days, a lot of the games that we play for the podcast, that just is not a concept. You pay for a finished game, and if it's not finished when you get it, you complain about it. There's this sort of like, albeit not great relationship between developer, publisher, and player sometimes when a game comes out buggy or unfinished or whatever. And we've talked so much about Nintendo holding such a high bar for releasing a game that is extremely polished and extremely stable, et cetera, et cetera. And it really can make or break games. But with Minecraft, though there were games like Dwarf Fortress that we mentioned in pre-show, and even going back to MUDs or early MMOs, I would even put EverQuest a little bit in this category. Mostly finished, but there was definitely a lot that wasn't there. But Minecraft was not only just as a concept for a game, a unique concept, and we'll get into that as we talk about everything from voxels to whatever, seeds. So I'm going to get into the timeline a little bit. So early on when it launched in its beta, public beta, they called it, and I think you remembered it was like $20 or something, right?
Yeah,
or $10.
10 or 20 is.
Yeah.
I remember them raising the price, so it like maybe started at 10 and went to 15 and to 20. It's kind of a vague recollection I have.
Yeah. It was largely created.
That's my memory.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. It was largely creative mode for the most part, and for a lot of our listeners probably played this game as younger people, and they will remember all of this. And I'll probably get some of this wrong, but I am looking at a timeline, so hopefully it's correct. But it was largely creative. Classic mode was creative. You had trees or like the basics, right? Some cave stuff. They added multiplayer test was pretty early, but the important thing that I want to mention in the first year, about halfway through the first year, the first survival test came out, and the concept of health at all in the game was added, which wasn't in the beginning. And creepers were added, specific monster enemy that's very critical to how the game works, in my opinion. And I remember vividly the sort of where I think this game really started to become viral in a way is when survival came out, and this concept of, because I do think it was one of the games that really created that genre, which is one of my favorite genres now. And I hadn't thought about it until we started playing for the podcast, that Minecraft is probably where my love of the genre started. But the concept of nighttime in Minecraft with survival modes having started once I bought this game and didn't know it was going to even have a survival mode. Maybe the hardcore community knew because they were keeping track, but I didn't know. I just one day had it. And then these creepers come out and blow up and take you out. and it completely changes the tone of the game. And then what's more is before, not until the end of 2009 was a crafting table added. So it's like all you could do was build, just harvest and build from what you had. You couldn't build certain things that a crafting table, like whatever tools or what have you. So it's just a really, like, I just wanted to make sure that we talked about the concept that, and then some other anecdotes, I guess. Not until the early 2010 was farming and armor added. Redstone wasn't until Alpha 1.0, it's called, which now I'm confused on the terms now that I'm looking at this thing. I thought this was all Alpha. Oh, they called it InDev. So wow. InDev was 0. Yeah, so I do know. So this is why I was confused, because the wiki is confusing because they called certain things public betas, but I remembered they didn't use that term at Mojang. So Alpha 1.0 was Redstone, and that wasn't until middle of 2010. Eggs weren't added until beta 1.0. Random example. The Nether was Alpha 1.2. So that was before beta. Beds weren't until beta, 2011. Beta 1.3. So it's just like, and then the Nether, and then the End and Enderman was later. So
a thing I've never seen, actually. So that'll be a thing.
The End or Enderman?
I've never seen the End. Yes, correct.
Right. Yeah. And so that's
I've never been. I've been to the Nether once, and I just stepped in. I was like, oh wow, and that was it. That was the last time I played, actually. Before this.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what we do and how far, because it's work.
Yeah, it's pretty involved, I gather, to get
there, and just to build up and to be able to survive. And that's kind of what Artemisia's whole concept of how far can they get, I think, in his event. Because it does take kind of a village, so to speak, no pun intended. But anyway, I'm kind of like soapboxing and flogging a dead horse here. But my point is, it was a very unique way to develop games, and then that combined with it blowing up and becoming super mainstream and very broad audience, I think made it a very important game.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree. I mean, the other thing I would talk about with regards to its virality and the stuff that I remember really hitting big at the time was, when things like fire propagation would happen, and you'd accidentally, you'd have videos of people who knows if it was an accident, or whether it was arson, but setting their homes ablaze and like the whole house burning and being like, I spent all this time building this thing and now it's all gone. Kind of reaction videos, we would call them today. I don't know if we called them that at the time. And it just being like, you could just watch those things all day. I mean, they were endlessly entertaining because people were finding, this very systemic game, with, propagation due to sort of, I guess you'd call that cellular automata, simulation, right? I mean, it's like the voxels and going from cell to cell and like how transitions happen across cell borders for different things. So like fire moves up, across combustible cells, right? And water moves down for unfilled cells and things like that. That's all I mean by that. But there are rules, there's, rules of like what goes through what sides of the cubes, of the voxels. So I remember that was something nobody had really seen before in that form. The Far Cry 2 examples, that we talked with Clinton about, with like, I did this and then there was a fire and the tiger raced through it and got caught on fire and was chasing me through the et cetera, et cetera. So there, these sorts of things were happening in games prior to that, just emergent systems. But this one had a whole new feel of like, but I just built all of that. How could they know to make that work? Right. In a way that, other sorts of games didn't feel like they had. So, because even if something's a sort of a fun factory of crazy situations, it still feels more authored because the player's not making any of those things in the world. And in the case of Minecraft, it was all stuff that you built, other than the initial seed. So when things happened, you're like, well, I did this to myself. Right. And that was part of the humor in those sorts of viral videos. Like, I didn't know this was going to happen. Oh, I got chased into here by 3 creepers and they blew up all my stuff and whatever. So yeah, anyway, that's the thing I remember. And to the point about early access, it really, it kind of put a different spin on the sort of free-to-play conversation to me as well. And it's another reason why it was important. This was like the PC equivalent of like, we're going to ship something that allows us to have a conversation with our users, which is, what the free-to-play, developers and proponents have always said is like, well, no, we give you a chance, you try it. And if we interest you, then we'll work with you to try to make it more the experience that you want, right? That's the sort of free-to-play motto, kind of in the best of circumstances. And the same thing is going on in early access. Like, okay, you're going to pay us because, we're it's kind of a different model, right? It's not on a phone and have a huge user base because it's on Steam, which is smaller than phones. We're going to have a conversation with you, and that's part of the experience of this, although you're going to buy in to do that. So it's a little bit different, but it kind of is like two sides of the same coin in my view.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good point in that with a free to play game, the monetization is completely different as well. And right. I think one of the magical things about this, and again, it wasn't the only game that did this, but I still think because of its viral nature and how big it blew up, it became like we often talk about. I think we've talked about it on the podcast, and we've talked about it in our day-to-day lives, that innovation is given, the credit for innovation comes from the ones who succeed, not necessarily the first ones that did it. And Minecraft succeeded so heavily that it now is pinned with sort of like before we had the term early access, and the concept that I paid my money and I get these updates for free, and they're very frequent and they're very significant. Like, I'm looking at this, like I said, I remember when wolves were added, playing the game, and it was just like, what? So
there are wolves.
Yeah. Well, it's like now there's so many animals, and then repeaters being added, and then, like I said, one at 1.0 is when they added the end. And of course, Enderman came before that. Hunger, actually, I'm looking at, is actually way later. That was middle of 2011 or so, the concept of hunger, which is kind of like has become a critical part of the survival genre. But it, came a year and a half, 2.5 years, right, after the game launched, the concept of hunger and the importance of what food is to the game. And now that's just commonplace in something like Valheim or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So, I just think super fascinating.
Well,
as far as like a development approach in history, and also indie, and also voxel based, and also in Java.
Yeah, right.
So it's like all of these, like, unorthodox, I guess. I don't know if that's a good way to use it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely true. I mean, the other thing I wanted to point out is that this also had one of the wilder stories of where it went. Certainly for any indie anything ever, when it was purchased by Microsoft for north of $2.5 billion in 2014. It's like, that is meteoric success. Incredible. Like the whole company was purchased, I guess, not just Minecraft itself, but because it's now a division of Microsoft. But but that is unheard of. In that kind of time frame. I mean, not unheard of, but it's a lot. I mean, by comparison, I want to say Bethesda / ZeniMax, all the companies under that umbrella went for around $4 billion. like 10 years later, or something like that, right? And
with
Discord,
many more IPs and many more,
way more IPs,
and more companies,
because it's id and it's Machine Games and Shinji Mikami Tango, GameWorks, so a bunch of companies, and lots of and live services and everything. And then Discord was the other thing I thought of as like a huge thing, was like 16 billion, just to like give you kind of scope and scale of things. I mean, this came from a little thing that somebody put up in Sweden, to be what it is today, and I don't know, probably undervalued at $2.5 billion over time. Honestly, I mean, people probably made out on that stuff.
Yeah, and of course, as we know, that was Phil Spencer's brainchild. He told a story at some point, and it was very much just like, because they, Minecraft was being ported, and I think there was an Xbox. I forget when the Xbox version came out. I don't know if it's on the timeline, but I don't think it has SKUs on here. But I'm looking at some of the stats too, and I'm just pulling this from the internet, of course. But supposedly, it's saying that it's the best-selling video game of all time at over 300 million copies, nearly 170 million monthly active users as of 2024. And so, to your point about
now 170 million and two.
Right. Yep, they got us. No, I already had my copy.
Active.
Oh, as far as active users, yeah, I'm back. But to your point about undervaluing, I forget, because I was at Halo. I was on Halo at the time, and I think some of this stuff is public. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think the amount of time that they made their money back on that deal was not a long time, if you know what I mean, right? As in the grand scheme of things. And so, as far as like smart purchases, as far as for the purchaser, which is from an indie development perspective, you'd want them to benefit more than they did. But it was, I think Microsoft predicted well its value to the world. And it's done lots of other things too, like it's used in classrooms. There's a bunch of different alternate SKUs to allow it to be used in certain ways. Creative mode eventually became they focused a lot on updating survival mode for a long time, and then they kind of went back around and came back around to make sure creative mode was fully fleshed out. So it's a really interesting journey, and I just love that this timeline exists. If you like Minecraft, I really encourage you to kind of time travel, go back to that thing, because it's really interesting to see, because it goes all the way up to today.
And on that point, that's where we should start talking about the game proper and liking Minecraft, because this was a rough start for me. And I remember when I started playing, I was like, oh yeah, this is why I don't play Minecraft, and didn't play a lot of it. And because it is like, it's just so undirected, it is so like it doesn't tell you. I mean, I guess some of the load screens say things like, oh, you should probably build a shelter because it's dangerous at night, I think is basically what, like, you want to be inside at night. And it's like, oh, okay, how do I do? Oh, I'm just here in the desert now. Like, I guess I'm just going to have to figure that out. And, of course I had played before, but I still, I stopped writing down how many times I died, because it just became like hilarious. I mean, it was like, the Three Stooges out there, where I just like, I would die and then I'd respawn. And of course I'm not very far from where I just died. And so all the enemies that just killed me are going to come kill me again. So there's a whole bunch of just that, of just like, well, I can't get far enough from where I spawn to be safe spawning again. And I'm not going to sit here and just wait for night to pass while the server's running. So that would happen. So in half an hour of play, I died 6 times and made 2 sandstone blocks. that was my half hour note. Okay, I've been playing for half an hour, and not much has happened. I've knocked down some cacti, I found some sticks, and I made 2 sandstone blocks. So it can be a rough start because it you know, not it doesn't direct you, but it also just doesn't tell you much about the world. I think in order to remain pure about being undirected, right? In that, like, well, if I told you, here's how to build a block, then you'd spend a bunch of time building blocks, right? You know, if I told you, you know, now go do that, you know, go cut down a tree or whatever, then, you know, et cetera. And that was another part, to tie it back to the virality, was like all of this was stuff that users figured out or discussed on the boards and all of that.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. Like when the crafting table came out, the 9 square grid, was like, you know, and you have, when you start out as a player without the crafting table, now you have the 4 squares that you can put things in and find out what it makes. And we talked about this a lot with playing classic World of Warcraft when we did that series. And I think Brett brought up, that was my memory, you probably brought up before this, but sort of the sanding of the edges that we've brought up time and time again, because we've played old games and modern games tend to do that. And one thing that bums me out, because I'm such a big fan of the genre, the discoverability, the discovering of things in survival games is really critical to me. Like, for instance, when I play something like Valheim, I intentionally don't go seeking any answers online. I don't go to any wikis. I don't go, like, even if I have a heart, like you said, like the point about dying 6 times in a half hour and building 2 blocks, to me, that is the point. Like, that's the key to this whole thing, is that yes, you're frustrated, but also you're like, I got to figure out how do I not die?
To the point. To the point when I actually built a building and lasted a night, it was a huge accomplishment.
Exactly.
Right. You know, and because I tried several different ways. I was like, oh, I'll just carve into the side of the hill a bit and start building walls around me. And I forgot I didn't cover me. So they just climbed down and fell into my open roofed hut that was built into the side of the mountain. And they killed me that way. I was like, oh my God. Okay. So I actually need to like build the walls up. So at a certain point I was like, okay, well, I'll do it on the open plain. Build the walls up. It's not a very big house. You know, it's like, well, if you go, you know, people will be able to see. But when you go to the server next to him, assuming you're still spawning in the original spawn point. Which
I am not. I have changed my spawn point. Yeah.
All right. Well,
I know where it is, though. I know where it is.
Yeah. So if you go back to it, you'll be like, oh, this is Brett's house. It's in front of these 2 cactuses where we would spawn every time. And it's like 3x4 or something like that, tops. And it's just tall enough that things can't get in. And I would just stand in the middle of it and look up at the sky until the sun came.
Yeah, exactly. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, especially when, you know, as it's one of my other topics I won't dive into too deeply now, but audio design for this game is so important, so critical, and so good, especially in music, separate from just audio design itself, but composition. So I'll get into that another episode, but you know, when you hear that creeper outside and you're looking up at the sky waiting for the night to end, you know, or you hear the skeleton or whatever, it's like so good. But yeah, going back to your point about like building the game with the community, building the game with no answers, and the 3x3 grid for the crafting table, when that was implemented, for those who remember, one of the key most interesting things, which again, people were dissecting this and figuring out all the answers to all the recipes right when it came out. And of course they hadn't implemented everything, so not everything had a recipe or you could make it. But the concept of taking that grid, and if you want to make a pickaxe, putting the ingredients in roughly the shape of a pickaxe in the 9x9 grid, and that resulting in a pickaxe, it's freaking amazing, you know? Yeah, and then not only that, but, oh, wait, I have all of these atomic elements that I'm getting from the world, a block of sand or a flower or whatever. Can they make something? I don't know. I'm going to put it in the crafting table and see what happens. And the reason I brought up the sanding of edges is, in the old days, there wasn't a recipe list that once you found something, it would populate, oh, you got a new recipe. It's like, no. You just had to write it down or remember what it was. and it would work, and then now you'd know. Of course, everyone went to a wiki someplace and solved it that way.
Yeah.
But now it's like so automated.
Well, yes and no, because I mean, when I was playing, I would go and look. I was like, oh, I need a weapon. I'd go and it's like, oh, here's how to make, or a pick or an axe or something. I guess an axe is what I was looking for the trees, and because I had a crafting table, and I was like, oh, how do I make an axe? And seeing that you could build an axe that way, I was like, oh, I bet I know how to make. And like I was off and running. Yeah. Like I could just figure it out for myself at that point. Yeah. I was like, oh, I get it. Like this is like Picross with stuff, you know, in a tiny icon. So like if I can think of something that might be in the game, I can experiment with how I might build it.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. And not only that, but like that structure of that within a game about blocks, the structure of the crafting is blocks. You know what I mean? Like there's just, as everyone knows from listening to this dumb podcast, that I love elegant solutions to things like that. And it's just it's so like, of course, but I don't think I would have thought of it, you know, or maybe we would have happened into it through iteration or something, but it's just so good. And then it just, once they had that structure and they added in a new element, like I'm seeing, you know, like redstone as an example, right? Like was added later, or an egg or something, you know, once you have that, once you add in a new thing, a whole new set of options for the player comes up, especially if you're somebody who bought in early, has the game, you're not having to pay, you know, any subscription or anything. You're getting these updates, and then you find out, oh, wolves were added in. Oh, what do I get if I kill a wolf? What do I get from the wolf? What can I do with that? You know, right, wolf pelt. You know, so it's just like your mind goes wacky about what all the different things you could do. And so, or when they added farming, right, or armor and things like, why do I need armor? Of course I need armor, you know, because of these enemies. Oh, and I also noticed too, early 2010 is when they added Infinite World. I forgot early on, you know, they were basically like the tile was limit. There was a limit to how big the world was going to be for that seed. We should talk about seeds later, I guess, another time. Yeah. And I want, so putting a pin in two things that I want to ask you about that I don't understand at all is how seeds work, and also the choice to go with voxels and how important that probably was for them, which also obviously launched a whole nother set of games because it gave permission to people to make something low res, right? And voxels.
Yeah. I mean, voxels had been tried before in other things, going back to the early aughts, I believe. It's my recollection. Maybe
like Black Hawk Down, right? Or
in the late
Delta
90s.
Force.
Yeah.
There were some shooters that used voxels.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking of particularly, but I'd have to look it up because I didn't expect to get to that topic tonight. So we'll definitely put a pin in that one, because that was not a kind of new thing, but tying it together with the
way they did
the cellular automata that I mentioned earlier, propagation basically was the really big innovation, I think, that really set it apart. One thing I will say about the rough start is that I have spent a lot of time playing Dragon Quest Builders, which is a Minecraft like, but it has a lot more structure. There's a story, you have goals, you have all that kind of support, around you. Yeah, and the recipes and all of those things. Like it definitely sands down a lot of the edges. But, for my sort of relaxing time, like this is not a relaxing game for me to play, Minecraft. I'm constantly like a little nervous, and I've spent a lot of time now. I've played for probably around 4 hours building like a building and a wall around it. Small building, again, probably not much bigger than the tiny little one by the spawn point. A little bit bigger, but not much. And then like a wall that's high enough, and it's like a bridge from the top of the building so I can get to the top of the wall. I've been widening out the wall so that the spiders can't jump over it. And like just, like I'm spending all this time on just like, okay, I need to know when I come in here, I'm gonna be okay.
Yeah.
is and the thing that to take this to kind of different weird place that I had never thought about, and it kind of comes around to this sort of survival game. It's probably because we mentioned it. We're talking about it together a little bit. This is today when I was doing this and I had built this building this way and then this wall this way and was like, okay, and then I'm going to make another bigger wall later. Like I was feeling really connected to, I don't know, to humanity in the sense that like, human beings, our basic needs, it's like, well, you can't live more than 3 minutes without air, more than 3 hours without shelter. That's under exposure conditions, obviously not, not any given day. Right. But, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. Right. And I was like, that's that's what's going on in this game. Of course, air is taken care of. You don't have to worry about that. Water is taken care of.
Unless you go swimming.
Water. Well, no, I mean ingestion.
Yeah.
And then, and food is kind of on a longer timeline than shelter. Shelter's way more important than food initially. Like, I'm not worried about food. I'm not even thinking about food. I'm thinking about like, how do I keep the wolves away, to your point. And then the final point of that is like, when I built this house and then built this wall around it, I was thinking, well, and then I'm going to build this other wall around that and have more buildings and stuff like that and be able to carve more doors and things like that and get to places. I was like, this is how cities were built. It's like, if you go to like Carcassonne in the south of the sort of, central France, I guess, sort of south central France, or Girona or Siena. I've been there as well. Like, you can go and look and it's like, oh yeah, and there's where there was another wall, and it's crumbled now, but like there used to be another wall here, and even further out. And I'm thinking Carcassonne specifically, like there were multiple walls, and I'm like, I am literally doing that or planning to do that, here in this. I built my tiny little thing, and it just made me feel really like have this moment of introspection of like, oh, this is why this connects, right? Is that it's such a deeply human thing, and I'm doing the things that humans did, to deal with it. So, well,
and the fact, I mean, it's maybe on the nose, but to your point, like the fact that the genre, I guess we'd have to do a lot more research and historical, searching to figure out if this is true or not. But they called that particular update the survival test, and I don't remember if it were the case, but there may have been games that claimed they were survival games before that. But for me, this was a launching off point, and now we have the survival genre. And survival is what humans do every day.
It's what creatures do. Yeah,
it's what creatures do. Yeah, so it's like you're giving people the tools. And I was thinking a lot because I've played, I don't know, I'm probably in the 500-hour range for Valheim. I know.
You're halfway to my Spelunky numbers. Well done.
Yeah, no, I'll never beat you. But the one thing going back to this game, because I actually played this game a lot in the past and throughout the years, I've obviously taken a long break, but I also played it with my kid as well, right? So I have those memories, and I might have talked about this in the podcast, but we recently went and found those old worlds. She had come back from college and like, hey, are those still around? And I was like, I don't know, let's go see. And they were there. We found them, and like the stuff we built back when she was younger and all this kind of stuff. So it was super neat. But this game, compared to something like Valheim, there's something very magical to your point about building walls and blocks and kind of like using what you have around you. Because in this game, it's not completely true 100% maybe, but everything in the world you can hold in your hand. You can break pretty much everything down by some means. You may need to find the means eventually, like mining diamonds or something. And then you can pick them up and put them in your hand, whatever it is. And there's this concept, and that's kind of where I wanted to talk about the choice to go with voxels or what have you. Because in Valheim, that's not completely true. Like you can definitely modify everything in the world, and it's very like you can dig and all that kind of stuff. But it's not like each piece is this atomic thing that has an entity to it. It's much more. It's a built-in Unity, and it's a whole different approach. And not every survival game does this. Another one I'll mention is Enshrouded, which is cool, but has a lot more limitations on what you could do to the world. So there's pros and cons. But Minecraft, I just am reminded how revelatory it is that it is so extreme to what it lets you do. Not let alone like, don't forget below the ground, there's a whole nother world. You could just dig straight down, which don't do that. That's very dangerous.
Yeah, don't. I know. I did one of the times that I died. I was just running across what appeared to be flat ground, and I stepped into a crevasse and fell to my death in the dark. I have no idea what's down there. I'm never going back.
It's so amazing. I have so many good memories and stories about finding, caves. I mean, there are amazing things below the ground, right? And you can dig anywhere. You can destroy any block.
When I was trying to figure out where I was going to go, I was like trying to, because it's a desert. I was trying to find, but there's a river through it, oddly. I guess it's kind of like the Nile, maybe. And
I was
like, I swam up the upriver, and it went basically through a cave and out the other side.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe this is a direction I could go. And then I died soon after. I was like, well, maybe I'll go a different direction. But I started, kind of spiraling away from the spawn point, and then coming back at night to preserve myself, just to see if I could get far enough away to start to see something else, something that was not, sand. So I was looking for trees, and ultimately, I found a couple of villages, which were way more prevalent than I expected based on my past experience.
Yeah, they've added a lot more stuff like that. Yeah,
and then I found another place where there was water that went into a cave, but that one didn't go through. So I was like, oh, I guess I'm not going this way. Like I had all these different sort of experiences just kind of exploring the space, which was also really cool, until I finally was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go over there. Of course, when I went over there, I was like, where is this relation to the spawn point? Oh, I don't know. I guess I'll find out next time I die, which of course was not that long. So
that's why I want to talk about the seeds too, because of the sense, and this will be in a future episode too, but the sense of exploration is a really key element for these games to me too. And because every world is so different, like you're always going to be, for me, I'm an explorer player type primarily, and I'm always surprised, right, when you see a new landmark or you find a village or whatever. And there's even a lot more than in the old days now, because there's like temples and and more dungeons, and dungeons have gotten more elaborate, the enemy types and such. And just to offer a little bit before we start closing, I died a lot too, just so you know. And again, I really revel in early Minecraft and early survival games, because it does feel so raw. It's like, and so I would have certain, I guess, because I don't want to give too much away about what I've been doing, but I have certain rhythms that I get into with a survival game, where I have certain goals that I immediately give myself. Like, I want to get to this kind of place, and I want to set up shop in this kind of place. So that's what I eventually did. And that's why I think it was so great and ironic that we started in the desert, because it forced me to, get out of the desert fast and find a solution, which caused me to die a lot, because I had to run at night a lot and then die again. And then, but I did eventually make a bed. So I have moved. I think it would be fun for me not to give you any idea where I went, and not give the community any idea, and see. It's a big world, but I don't know. I think we should kind of play it out a little bit. I'll go back to the spawn point and probably harass you a little bit and leave some fun notes or something. I don't know.
Yeah, don't take any of my stuff, man. I worked
I
hard on
won't.
this
I
stuff.
won't take any of your stuff, but
I'm having a tough. I've played a lot less of this game than you have, so I need a little forbearance.
yeah, no, no, I know. I will. I'll maybe I'll leave you a present as well. Something to give you a little bit of a head start, a little Deus Ex Machina for you, huh? Huh? Anyway, yeah, I mean that's one of the cool things that we'll probably talk about much later is the multiplayer side of it and servers and then communities and then of course modding. But yeah, I don't know. It gives me all the feels, and I love your point about connecting to the raw sort of deconstruction of what creatures and humanity bring to it. Maybe that is, that's kind of why I like these games so much. I'm a backpacker and I like that kind of stuff. And not that I'm out surviving, but there's something about it.
I'm not.
Yeah. And there's a reason. Yeah. So I don't know,
indoor kid. Game. I like walls, structures.
yeah, exactly. And I was like, get me out of here.
Give me a list, please. I would like a list. That is me. But yeah, so it was interesting. I mean, one of the things, and we didn't kind of talk about this, but one of the things that was hard for me starting this time was like I really wanted to play like the 2011 version.
Yeah.
And because we did that with Dwarf Fortress, we did the earliest possible version we could, which was, which is another one in this kind of model, different kind of game. But also deeply simulated and with mining. So it's got a lot of similarities and crafting, a lot of similarities as well. But it's, that's just not a thing that's available with Minecraft, unfortunately, because it would have been really, really fun and interesting to give that a try.
Play the timeline in a way,
we
did with Dwarf Fortress.
We played several points along the way. Even just
to
play
mods out there.
2011. Yeah, but I mean, it's hard to mod out like the quality of life stuff that people like, and I know there's a lot of mods out there. Maybe there's a mod that basically rolls it back to 2011. That seems hard to believe, but also I'm using a Realm, and I'm not sure server wise.
On the official, because the Realms are official. Yeah, official Mojang. Yeah, I don't think that they'd let you do that. But I mean the Windows version now isn't on Java anymore, right? It's
you can still get the Java version.
Yeah, but I mean the one we're playing, I don't think is.
We're not. No, we're not playing the Java version.
So there's also that.
Yeah,
it's kind of interesting. It would be for a game this important and big and successful. Similar to WoW Classic, right? The WoW World of Warcraft Classic World of Warcraft came out because of the community need for it, right? They were making their own illegal servers, and Blizzard's like, you can't do that, but why don't we do it?
Yeah. That's an opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. So there's that side of it, which is a bummer, sort of. But I feel like if there's a game that needs a sort of time travel, ability to time travel, it would be this game. I think people would really appreciate it to some degree, because I guess all the information's spoiled at this point, but I'd love to not be. I was bummed, and I was looking at sort of the most recent update, which is on this timeline too, which I guess is out now, 1.21. And they have something called auto crafting, which I think we might have in this version. I'm trying to figure out what that means exactly, because armadillos are in this release too, and I saw armadillos while I was playing. So we must have this.
Whatever we have is the latest and greatest, because we're running a Realm, and anytime.
Yeah,
those are just.
But on the timeline, it says it's in the future, so I think its timeline's just not up to date.
Oh yeah, probably not. Yeah.
But reading the word auto crafting just depresses me.
Yeah,
it's come on, that's the point.
Yeah.
So it's the sanding the edges problem.
Yeah, removing the useful friction is water stays down, makes them less interesting often. So, well, we will talk a lot more about this game and build a lot more stuff. But let us turn to an email. This one's from France, I think. It's sent to devgameclub@gmail.com.
Okay, the future of sequels from Miss Terry Jilapoo. Sorry. I'm not sure. Sorry.
It's Miss Terry Deepu.
Deepu. Is this really from France?
It's not really from France.
Okay. Okay. All right.
If you're
So
gonna go for that.
I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe a little too opaque for me to. Yeah. Okay. Be fooled. Bonjour. Since updates were infrequent or impossible in the early years of game releases, sequels served to both improve upon concepts and to funnel existing customers. As online updates became ubiquitous, patches, DLC, and expansions started blurring the lines as to when a release was complete. Now we are in an era where some consoles are shipping without a media slot, cloud gaming services are achievable, companies want their own games as service. The physical boxes either contain a download code, so weird, or require a large day one patch. It seems the world wants to move in the direction of the game is whatever you download today. As we've seen with some sequels from small and large developers, making something new is sometimes a flop. It seems a safer bet to make one game you're known for and keep iterating on that for the same financially recurring audience. Is this the future? Is there still a place for bespoke sequels? Cordially.
Cordialement.
Cordialement. I took French in school too, and I still can't. Miss Terry. Yeah.
Anyway, that's for those who aren't following. It's Mystery Dip. Hello, Mystery Dip.
Oh, okay. I did not get that at all.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Mystery Dip. He's just getting worse and worse.
He's trying to hide the fact that he's going for a longest streak of emails because this is 3 emails in a row.
He's trying. He's in. It's a disguise. He's disguising his name in email form. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm too dense to get that mystery. that one fooled me. I mean, I guess you succeeded because I wouldn't have known.
Yeah, I see the actual email addresses and who it's actually from, and I don't have to share that information with you. So I just see his name in the email in the inbox. Anyway, as far as bespoke sequels go, I mean, I think that we're still in an era where those are possible. Unfortunately, I think, well, there's just kind of two things. One is that the indie space is alive and well, and those smaller things are always going to, have a place for this, and that's kind of where a lot of sort of interesting things are happening in this vein. On the larger scale, I think what happens is they all have to be these huge tent poles if they're going to kind of use that model, and they have to kind of bring in, whatever the number is that it has to be, and that as long as it's coming in with that number, they're going to keep making them. It's all market forces at that point. So your Assassin's Creeds and things like that, and actually all of Ubisoft's models are like bespoke iterations on their major franchises, right? So it's going to, those are going to continue to happen that way as long as it's profitable. And if it becomes not profitable, then some other model will have to come to the fore. I mean, that's all I can really say about it, I think. But I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, because we've lived, both of us and our colleagues have lived through this whole transition throughout our careers, because, we kind of started around the time the internet really, was getting going when it comes to online games and such. And there was definitely an era, a few years of time when this concept of day one patches was looked down on as, how could you? It's like, and it kind of like it unleashed this sort of concept, I think, in developers, at least on games that I worked on, that had this debate happening of like, how big is your online patch going to be? And there's actually at some points policy about it, right? At certain companies where it's like, you can't be bigger than this because you don't want players to have to, you want them to be able to play right away or whatever. And like, that's all gone now.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring it up is it's like, there's certain, this is going to maybe be too theoretical, but every generation, there's always some boundaries that developers are going to be hitting. It could be, every generation claims there's a graphics boundary, right? And it just kind of keeps getting upped every generation. There's memory, there's whatever hardware chips, there's whatever, whatever that is.
Yeah, ray tracing now, and then whatever. Yeah,
yeah, and then to Mystery's question, it's like there's bandwidth, and there's how much can you download, and what are players willing to deal with when it comes to downloading. Even for a bespoke game, like yes, Ubisoft has their model, but they still have day one patches as well.
Oh,
and so, but it does work out of the box if you're not connected to the internet. To your point, right? And so I just like, in a way, what I'm trying to say is it doesn't matter. Like, yes, that is true. The internet has happened, and any developer, or what I will say is any content creator, any creative content person who is making something is going to leverage the internet. And that's going to come with things like day one patches or what have you. But I think to your point, like the weird thing that's happened is that the space has the space has turned into the extremes on both sides. You have the indie space, smaller games, more developer focused and controlled games that are able to do bespoke games if they want to. And then you have, I think Ubisoft's a good example. I think a better example is now Sony, who has dabbled in online and is trying to figure it out, and has now come back and said, oh no, and publicly even, oh, actually, we're pretty good at the bespoke games. We're going to keep doing those. They're huge, triple digit million games. They're story based. They're single player, most of them. They might have a day one patch, but we like those big blockbuster, like you said.
Right. The question's more about the sequels, though. And yeah, I think Sony is like, yeah, they're still going to be doing the sequels because I think those need to be that's how you build the tentpoles, right? You make your first one and you hopefully get away with it cheap. And then you're like, well, if that one hits at all, then we'll invest bigger in the next one and make a bigger bet. Or maybe we won't, maybe they'll be like, well, we don't really see that, having a bigger return. Yeah, I mean, the internet has happened. The internet has enabled more of the like constantly updating sorts of games, I guess was his counterpoint. What about a world where there's sequels? We're talking about a game, now that is like, it's just been updated and updated and updated and updated, for that's the whole model. And that's true of other games we've played as well. So
yeah, those tent poles allow you to experiment. My point with Sony was going to things like Horizon, where that's a new IP, big tent pole game that they didn't know was going to be successful or not, and then the result of it was a big sequel afterwards, right? It's like that was their iteration, even though the internet exists.
Yeah.
So I don't think those are going to go away, but I think we will constantly adapt to what we have in front of us because it's there, and we use it to our advantage.
That point is definitely taken. Yeah, I mean, I still look askance at huge day one patches. I mean, part of why that happens is because it becomes a negotiating tactic between the developer and the publisher, or the publisher and the platform holder, as to what we can let slide, insert, because we'll have it fixed.
Dangerous. Yeah.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, I think it's a terrible model, and we should be all ashamed that we do it. But it's often not in our hands, right? It's not a decision I'm making. It's a decision that's made kind of at a business and sales kind of level, because hitting the date is the most important thing. So because of marketing plans and how much spend is done on marketing now, like you have to hit those dates. And so that's why we've got, it's like, well, then we have to squeeze as much as possible into the day one patch, and we'll push on the publisher. Like, they don't want it not to come out, or the platform holder rather, they don't want it to not come out on the date either, right? So it's like all the incentives are there to push things into patches, to kind of go inside on patches.
Well, it's like as you're closing, inside baseball, that maybe many of you already know, but like, to give an example, as you're closing a game like those tentpole games, you're triaging bugs, for instance, and you have your gold master / release build that you're trying to finalize. And you mark bugs for that build. Then there's a field for bugs for the day one patch that is after that, right? And so to Brett's point, you're triaging bugs for one or the other. And if something is important to be in that release, that's going to be essentially on the disk, but again, it's a code, let's face it. Then there's also like the bugs that get pushed to, okay, it's not as important, but we still want to do it, but we don't have time to do it in time for the quote unquote old fashioned gold master. So let's put it in the day one patch and it's marked differently, So it is this weird new kind of like buffer. Like, what's a good analogy in other place in life? It's like, it's a procrastination kind of like, but I think to your point on why it has become a dangerous thing. And this is where I was not succeeding in my point about limitations in any form, is that I think one of the most important things that we talk about, I talk about a lot, we talk about day to day, everybody in makes games should be talking about is, the right amount of stuff to make the game as high quality as possible, not trying to do too much, basically. Yeah. And I think with the day one patches and even limitations on other boundaries, whether it's graphics or what have you, it's like you should constantly be cutting and focusing on the right portion of the game rather than trying to sneak more in.
Yeah.
You should be taking more out. And I think that's kind of the Nintendo approach, as we know. So these sorts of bad habits have gotten worse because of stuff like this, because people shouldn't be trying to sneak more in. They should be taking it out instead. And technology like this has given people the permission to be sneaky.
Yeah.
And it's causing problems.
An analogy for me is that I set my bedroom alarm clock to be 9 minutes fast.
Yeah.
Because that means I can hit the snooze button once in the morning and I know I'm still on time for when I actually wanted to get up.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Just, at a cost of millions and millions of dollars. It's kind of a difference of scale, really.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for the email, Miss Terry Dip, or however that was supposed to be pronounced.
Dipieux,
Mr. Dipieux. That was sent, of course, as I said earlier, to devgameclub@gmail.com. We also love to get your reviews. I get all of those if they're on the Apple infrastructure, but if you're somewhere else, let us know or send it in. We love to read them on the show. We have a website at devgameclub.com. My co-host twitches when he can at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
Is this ever happening again?
It's gonna happen again. I'm sorry, folks, but it's not. It's not gonna happen, I think, for a little bit. So
yeah, it's that time of year. It's the most wonderful time of the year, where we're just crazy busy.
I'm trying to hit the goal of streaming Final Fantasy VI for a whole year. So I'm actually stalling a little bit because I want to make sure that I finish.
You want to make sure
12 months.
How about
later.
a decade? How about just stretch it out to 2030? We'll get you there someday. You can also find us on our Discord. There is a link in the show notes, and that's where you're going to want to go if you want to play on our server or suggest Tim's game to play on this year's Defeating Games for Charity stream in January. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, the Discord, our merch store are all by Mark Garcia. Have fun figuring out what you can do with a stick this week. And good night.
So much.
Good night.